I never thought anything would happen between us.
He was just my son's friend. Young, confident, always hanging around the house like he didn't realize the effect he had on me. But that night, when I was half asleep and heard my bedroom door creak open, everything changed. I turned over, and there he was, standing in the dark, eyes burning, breath shallow. Then he quietly closed the door behind him.
What happened next, I didn't see coming, but I didn't stop it either. Let me take you back to the moment I crossed a line I swore I never would. I used to think quiet was a gift. After the divorce, I convinced myself that silence meant peace, that the empty spaces in the house were freedom, not loneliness. I got used to the hum of the refrigerator at night, the echo of my own footsteps on the stairs, the way sunlight settled in the living room around 5 p.m., brushing against nothing but dust and memories. But ever since Eli started coming around, the quiet hasn't felt the same. He's my son Nate's best friend. They met in college, bonding over video games and late-night junk food, the usual. Eli's the kind of kid who fits in without trying. Lean frame, long lashes, a quiet mouth with a half smirk, like he's always on the edge of laughing at something no one else heard. The first time Nate brought him over for the weekend, I barely noticed him. Just another teenager. Headphones slung around his neck, hair he didn't bother brushing. But then he started staying over more often. Whenever Nate came home for a long weekend or break, Eli was almost always with him. He was polite, always cleaned up after himself, helped carry in groceries if he was around, thanked me for dinner. Every single time. And yet, there was something about him, something I couldn't quite name. It was the way he moved through the house, like he belonged here, or maybe like he wanted to. I started noticing small things. The way Eli's eyes lingered just a second too long when we passed in the hallway. How his voice lowered ever so slightly when he spoke directly to me. How one night I caught him watching me from the kitchen doorway while I was washing dishes, eyes sharp, unreadable. He didn't look away. He just tilted his head slightly, gave that almost smile, then disappeared upstairs like nothing happened. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was nothing. But the thoughts came anyway. It had been years since anyone looked at me like that, or the soft rasp of his voice in the mornings, thick with sleep when he greeted me. How he'd sometimes walk around in nothing but gym shorts, no shirt, his skin sun-warmed, completely at ease, like it never even occurred to him that I might be looking. But I was, and that terrified me. One night I came home late from work. The living room lights were still on. The television played softly in the background. Nate was asleep on the couch, limbs sprawled out, a bowl of popcorn tipped over on the carpet. Eli was there too, on the other side of the sectional, curled up under a blanket, one arm tucked behind his head, shirtless. The blanket rode low on his hips. I froze in the doorway. He looked peaceful, his breathing slow, maybe asleep, maybe not. But the way his lips were parted, the way his chest moved as he breathed. My eyes lingered longer than they should have. I told myself I was just making sure he was comfortable. But that was a lie I could almost believe. Then, His eyes opened. He didn't move, just looked at me. Not startled, not embarrassed. His gaze met mine, calm, unreadable. And in that still moment, something passed between us. Invisible but undeniable. I stood there, caught, like a thief in my own home. After a second, I muttered something about turning off the TV and slipped upstairs. Before I did something I couldn't undo. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every shift of the sheets loud in the silence. And that look, that brief, wordless look, it replayed behind my eyes again and again. I told myself I imagined it. But I hadn't. And worse than that, I knew I didn't want it to stop. The next morning I tried to act normal, tried to keep my voice steady as I asked if they wanted pancakes, tried to meet Eli's eyes like nothing had happened, like I hadn't spent the whole night turning that moment over in my head. But when he walked into the kitchen, shirtless again, hair messy from sleep, that same jolt hit my stomach, sharp and unshakable. He moved with that same quiet, barefoot ease, like he belonged here, like the house bent slightly to accommodate him. Nate was still upstairs, probably passed out. Eli muttered a soft "morning" as he walked past me to grab a glass of water. I nodded back, doing my best not to look at the way his shorts sat low on his hips. "You sleep okay?" I asked, even though I knew I hadn't. Like I hadn't nearly brushed up against a line I should never cross. The conversation turned to college midterms, a road trip they were planning. Eli sat across from me, casually twirling his fork between his fingers. And every now and then, I caught him watching me, just over the rim of his glass. Later that afternoon, I walked into the living room to grab a charger and found Eli alone on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I entered. "Your son's in the shower." I nodded, pretending to look for something near the coffee table. "You always this tense?" he asked suddenly. I froze. "What do you mean?" He set his phone down, leaned back into the cushions, one arm draped over the backrest. "I don't know. You act like you're holding your breath around me." My heart pounded in my chest. "I'm not." "You sure?" he asked, his tone quiet but pointed. A long pause stretched between us. One of those dangerous silences that says more than any answer could. My mouth was dry. I couldn't lie, at least not convincingly. "I just try to give you space," I said finally. He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. He only gave that faint smile again, then nodded. "That's fair." Fair. I left the room before I could embarrass myself any more. That night, the boys watched movies again. I could hear the muffled sound of explosions and laughter echoing through the walls. Around midnight, I peeked into the living room. Nate was already asleep, head tilted awkwardly against the couch cushion, game controller still in hand. But Eli wasn't asleep. He was sitting up slightly, legs stretched under the blanket, eyes on the screen, though it was clear he wasn't really watching. His head turned slowly when he saw me in the doorway. Neither of us spoke. I stood there too long, throat tight. "You're still up," I said quietly. He shrugged. "Wasn't tired yet." I nodded. "All right, good night." But as I turned to leave, I felt it again, that strange pull, like the air between us had thickened. "Hey, Mr. Hale," he said. His voice was softer now. I stopped. He looked at me, not with a smirk, not teasing, just honest. You don't have to keep pretending you don't see it. I felt the breath leave my chest. I don't know what you mean, I replied, even though we both knew I did. He nodded slowly, mouth twitching, like he almost believed me. But not quite. Then he pulled the blanket higher, leaned back, and a soft, measured step. Then stillness. Right outside my door. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And whoever it was, who I knew it was, never knocked. After a minute, the footsteps retreated. Silence returned, but I was already wide awake, staring into the dark, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't frozen. Wondering just how close we already were to something neither of us could take back. And this was the beginning of everything. The next morning felt too bright. Sunlight poured through the blinds like it didn't care about the quiet storm building in my chest. I lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, letting the kettle hiss while I stared blankly out the window. I hadn't slept. Not after those slow, deliberate footsteps. Not after imagining what might have happened if I'd opened the door. By the time Eli walked in, barefoot, wearing only black boxer briefs and a faded grey t-shirt that barely skimmed his waist, I was already on edge. He looked half asleep, hair sticking out in all directions, but his eyes were sharp. "Morning," he said casually, heading to the fridge like he'd done it 100 times before. "Where's Nate?" I asked, trying to focus on the mug in my hands. "Still knocked out upstairs," he said, grabbing a bottle of water. "He was up all night playing something." I nodded and turned away, pretending to be busy pouring tea. But I could feel him behind me, how the room felt smaller when he stood too close. I didn't hear him move, but I knew the moment he did. I felt the warmth of him at my back. And then his voice, lower now, closer. "You don't talk much when we're alone." I turned slightly, trying to keep my tone even. "I talk plenty." He smirked, sipping from the bottle slowly, just not to me. I looked at him then, and instantly regretted it. His shirt hung loose, slipping off one shoulder, exposing the smooth curve of his collarbone. His lips were still damp from the bottle, and his eyes, they didn't flinch. "Maybe I'm just trying to be careful," I said. "Why?" His question wasn't flippant, it was direct, steady. The silence that followed pressed heavier than anything either of us had said. Finally, I stepped past him toward the sink. "Because I'm not a fool," I muttered. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossing over his chest. "You think this is a game to me?" "I don't know what this is," I said, still facing the window. He didn't. "So?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "You think I care about that?" "You should," I snapped. "You should care about all of this, about what it means." He stepped forward. Slow. Deliberate. Until only a foot of space remained between us. "You care enough for both of us. That's your problem." I backed away, pulse racing, before I could do something reckless. "Go put on some damn clothes," I muttered. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. Just that maddening calm. like he already knew I wouldn't hold out much longer. Then he turned and walked out of the kitchen, the curve of his back disappearing down the hallway. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles went white. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Nate eventually came downstairs, groggy and clueless. The two of them spent the afternoon lounging on the couch, watching TV, eating leftovers. I stayed in the background, forcing myself to act like a functioning parent. Like I hadn't come seconds from grabbing Eli by the waist and kissing the defiance off his face that morning. That evening, I stepped out onto the porch for air. The sun hung low behind the trees. I heard the door creak open behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was him. He stepped beside me, sipping from a glass of soda, like we hadn't spent the entire day circling each other like wolves. "You okay?" he asked after a moment. I nodded. "I just need space." He was quiet for a while. Then, "Do you want me to stop?" The question hit like a punch to the chest. I looked at him. "I don't know." He nodded slowly and turned his gaze toward the sky. "You're afraid I'll break something," he said. "But maybe it's already cracked. Maybe it's been that way since before I showed up." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Later that night, I passed by the guest room Eli always stayed in. The door was slightly ajar. The light was off, but I could see the outline of him through the soft spill of hallway light. One arm thrown over his eyes, shirtless again, the sheet low across his hips. I stood there longer than I should have, and for a second, I swear I saw him. He glanced toward me, but I kept walking, even though everything inside me screamed to stay. Because something was coming, something I wasn't ready for. And yet, I knew when it finally happened, it wouldn't be gentle. I woke to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. His hair was messy, his face unreadable. "What are you doing?" I managed, my voice rough with sleep. But not panic, not anymore. He didn't answer, just kept walking. "I can't," I said, quieter this time. "You know I can't." "You already did," he murmured. Then he was beside the bed, standing still, looking down at me like I was something fragile, something forbidden. For a long second he didn't move, just watched me, breathing quietly. And then, slowly, deliberately, he climbed onto the bed. My body tensed beneath him, heart pounding. I should have said something, should have stopped it, drawn a line. But I didn't, because I wanted him. I'd wanted him for weeks, maybe longer than I dared admit. And now here he was, close enough to feel the warmth coming off his skin, close enough that I could hear his breath, shaky, controlled. I reached up, just lightly, fingers brushing against his side where the fabric dipped low. He shivered, his hands settled beside me on the bed, palms flat, holding himself up just inches from my face. "I thought about this all day," he whispered. "Every time you looked at me like you were angry, like you wanted to yell. I knew it was because you wanted this." His gaze searched mine. No games now, no misreading it. Then he leaned in, just enough for his lips to graze my jaw, soft, testing. When I didn't stop him, he pressed closer, his mouth tracing a slow path to the corner of mine. I tilted my head, and our lips met. Firm, hungry, unmistakably real. We kissed like the moment had been waiting for us, like neither of us knew what would come after, but we couldn't stop now. Heat, tension, Everything we'd both been denying, now crackling between us in the dark. He sprawled across my chest, feeling the rise and fall of my breath. I closed my eyes, heart pounding as I tried to stay grounded, but every part of me was lit up, alive, trembling with need. "You've been holding this in for so long," he whispered against my skin. I could see it, every time I walked into the room. I couldn't deny it, not anymore. His hands roamed, sure, warm, reverent. It wasn't rough or rushed. It was deliberate, honest. Like we both knew the weight of the line we were crossing and chose to step over it anyway. When our lips met again, it wasn't just hunger. It was heat and history. Weeks of glances, nights of silence. Every breath we hadn't dared share until now, and neither of us seemed ready to pretend otherwise. Morning came gently. Birdsong filtered in through the cracked window, the slow creak of the ceiling fans slicing through the quiet. For a moment, I forgot, until I felt him shift beside me. Eli, his leg draped over mine, arms slung across my waist, his breathing soft and steady, as if he'd always belonged there. But nothing about this was simple. I stared at the ceiling again, trying to remember how to breathe without guilt. He stirred, pressed his face into my shoulder. "You're tense," he mumbled, voice low and raspy with sleep. "You broke into my room," I muttered, "and gave me the most intense night I've had in a decade." He chuckled against my skin. "Didn't hear you complaining." I turned my head to glare at him, but the smirk on his face nearly cracked me. "You should go," I said, softer this time, "before Nate wakes up." He didn't move. "Do you want me to?" I hesitated, looked at him, this boy, this man, bare, open, unapologetic, mocked by my hands. His fingers traced idle shapes across my stomach, and I didn't want him to stop. "No," I said quietly. "I don't." He leaned in, kissed the edge of my jaw, slow, warm, grounding. "Then I won't." I reached up, cupping the back of his neck, pulling him in again. Our lips met, not rushed like before. This kiss was slower, deeper, more certain. He moved over me, our chests pressed together, heat building between us again, new, yet familiar. "I can't believe I'm hard again," he murmured with a breathless laugh, his voice teasing but sincere. And I laughed too, quietly, because we both knew this was more than just release. This was the moment we stopped pretending. "You're 19, I murmured against his neck, pulling him tighter. "You could probably go 6 more times and still have enough left to ruin me." "I want to ruin you," he whispered, voice low and heated. His mouth trailed down the line of my throat, pausing just above my collarbone. He sucked gently, letting the mark settle before moving lower. Every inch of me was burning. By the time he pressed himself against me, I was already breathless, arched into him, gasping as his warmth met mine. "Don't start what you can't finish," I muttered, my voice strained and thick. But he didn't falter, not this time. His hands were steady, his mouth was confident, and when I gave in, it was all consuming. The room blurred, sheets tangled. He scrambled for his clothes, pulling on his sweats, fumbling with buttons, eyes darting to the door. I watched him dazed, the same boy who had just held me like I was something precious, now scrambling like he'd broken something. "You'll be fine," I said, trying to sound calm. "You think he knows?" "Not yet." He hesitated. then stepped back toward me. His hands cupped my face, and he kissed me deep, slow, like he didn't want to leave. "I'll come back later," he whispered. Then he was gone. I lay in the wreckage, the scent of him still on my skin, the weight of it all settling into my chest like smoke that wouldn't clear. Later that day, we sat around the kitchen table. Nate talked about car trouble. Eli barely looked at me, but under the table his foot brushed against mine and stayed there. My fork froze midair. He didn't flinch, just kept talking about a concert they wanted to see next month, as if nothing had happened. I excused myself, pressed my back against the hallway wall, heart racing, fists clenched, because this wasn't over. This wasn't something I could tuck neatly away. I didn't see Eli for 2 days. Nate had gone back to campus early for a group project. The house went still again, but this time, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Every room felt haunted. The hallway where I'd clenched my fists, the bathroom mirror where I hadn't bothered to cover the faint pink marks on my throat. I didn't know if Eli would come back, but part of me hoped he would. And then, Friday night, he did. I was in the kitchen pretending to clean. It was late, that kind of late that makes you question your own thoughts. I didn't hear the door open, but I heard it close, soft. Then the sound of footsteps. When I turned, he was standing in the doorway, a hoodie on, backpack slung over one shoulder, like he was just stopping by for a movie and a snack. But his eyes were darker now, wilder. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Then why are you?" I asked. He set the bag down, stepped closer. "Because I can't stop thinking about you, about what we did." I didn't speak. I couldn't. His eyes scanned my face, like he was trying to decide whether I was about to push him away or pull him in again. "You keep acting like this was some accident," he said, "like it just happened." "Wasn't it?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He stepped even closer, his voice quiet but sure. "You wanted me. I know you did." "I still do," I admitted, my voice raw. "That's the damn problem." I thought it would scare him. I thought he'd finally see the weight of this and walk away. But he didn't. He stepped in and kissed me, fast, rough, like he was done. We stumbled through the kitchen, knocking into chairs. Our breath turned ragged. I shoved him back against the fridge, biting his lower lip. He gasped into my mouth. His hands slipped under my shirt, fingertips dragging over my skin like he was mapping something sacred. "Bedroom," I muttered. "No," he said, panting. "Here." And just like that, we gave in. Right there, between the stove and tile floor, we came undone all over again. Quick, reckless, silent but for the sound of breath and want. Every barrier had already been shattered. There was no hiding anymore. I pulled him close, lifted him up onto the counter. His legs wrapped around me, his chest flush against mine. We kissed again, slower this time, like we needed to learn each other all over again. "Daniel," he whispered, "I want all of you. Please." We didn't make it to the bedroom. We didn't need to. I held him close, careful and breathless, as we found something between need and surrender, as we moved in sync, bodies pressed together, our hearts pounding louder than words. The air felt charged, hot and electric. Every breath, every touch was full of all the things we hadn't said. When it was over, we collapsed on the kitchen floor, half-dressed, limbs tangled, bodies still trembling. He lay against my chest, his heartbeat echoing mine, both of us struggling to catch our breath. Not just from what we'd done, but from what it meant. Eventually, he pulled back, sat upright. His face wasn't full of shame. Not exactly. It was something harder, something scared. "I don't know what this is," he said quietly, "but I know I don't want to stop." I reached up, brushed the sweat from his forehead. "You don't have to figure it out tonight." He nodded slowly. "Nate can't know," he added. "He won't, I promised. Not unless you want him to." He leaned into me again, and this time I didn't let go. Again, his voice was quieter now. "This isn't just sex for me." "I know," I said. "It isn't for me either." We sat like that for a long time, his body warm against mine, the room still humming with everything we hadn't said. Eventually, he stood, redressed slowly, then leaned in and kissed me softly, like a promise. And then he slipped out the back door, leaving me alone again with the scent of him on my skin and the ache in my chest. But this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the start of something. Something we weren't ready for, but wanted anyway. I was letting it settle, letting it mean something, letting myself feel. By the afternoon, my phone buzzed. "I don't know how to go back to pretending." I stared at the message for a long time, and then I wrote back, "Then don't." He didn't reply, not right away. But later that night, I saw his hoodie hanging on the back of a chair in the hallway. I hadn't noticed it before. Or maybe I had, but I wasn't ready to admit what it meant. It stayed there for days. Eventually, I picked it up, pressed it to my face, and inhaled the faint trace of him, skin, cologne, something warm and young and real. It made my chest tighten, because he wasn't just my son's friend anymore. He was the boy who walked into my life, closed a door behind him, and unlocked something in me I thought I'd buried for good. He made me feel whole again, not just touched, but seen, wanted, alive. And maybe we wouldn't last. Maybe the world would never accept what we were. Maybe this thing between us was a storm we weren't strong enough to survive. But for now, we had this. What happened that night changed me, and no matter how hard I tried to forget, the way his voice broke when he said my name, the look in his eyes when he kissed me like he meant it, I knew I never would. Some doors, once closed behind you, never truly open the same way again. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't want them to. I knew the world would say it was wrong, that we could never be what people would understand. But when he touched me, when he looked at me like I was something he needed just to breathe, I stopped caring. Even now, with the silence wrapping around me again, I still feel him, on my skin, in my chest, in that part of me that had been numb for so long. Yes, we crossed a line, but I can't pretend I didn't want him to. And if you've ever wanted something you weren't supposed to, you'll understand. Let me know in the comments, because I don't know what comes next. I only know, if he walked in again, if he locked that door one more time, I'd let him.